Philadelphia, Tuesday evening. The sun had dipped behind the skyline, and the thick summer air clung to everything like wet wool. Judge Clarice Whitmore stepped out of the underground parking garage of the James A. Byrne U.S. Courthouse, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor. She clutched a slim leather briefcase against her side, the weight of classified documents pressing through the lining. 14 hours of testimony, depositions, and late rulings had left her shoulders aching, but her mind was still sharp, trained to scan, assess, and listen even in fatigue. She paused. At the far end of the garage, 3 uniformed officers clustered around a young man in jeans and a green hoodie. His hands were on the hood of a silver sedan. Clarice squinted. The car had a federal plate. Her brow furrowed. The officers weren't shouting, not yet, but their posture told a different story. One of them, tall with close-cropped blonde hair, gestured sharply. The man at the hood didn't resist, but even from this distance, Clarice could see the tension in his stance. It wasn't just fear, it was humiliation. She sighed. This wasn't new. Not in Philadelphia, not anywhere. Clarice pulled her badge from her purse and slipped it inside her blazer pocket, just in case. As she moved forward, calm and deliberate, her judicial instincts stirred. Something about this didn't sit right. Not the time, not the place, and definitely not the license plate. "Evening, officers," she said, her voice level but unmistakably firm. "Mind if I ask what's going on here?" The tallest officer turned. His expression twisted, not in recognition, but irritation. "Step back, ma'am. This is official police business," he snapped. Clarice didn't flinch. "That's a federal employee's vehicle," she said, nodding toward the plate. "Is your stop coordinated with the courthouse or U.S. Marshals?" Now all 3 officers turned to look at her, and just as one of them reached for his radio, heavy boots echoed from the garage ramp. Captain Darren McCaffrey had arrived. Captain Darren McCaffrey was the kind of man who made people move out of the way without a word. His bulk filled the garage like a threat, his hands planted on his utility belt as he surveyed the scene. 52, silver hair slicked back, and a reputation carved out over 2 decades, most of it behind closed doors. He looked straight at Clarice and saw, not a judge, just a black woman asking questions. He didn't like questions. "What's the problem here?" he barked, glancing at the officers. "She stepped in," the tall one replied, jerking a thumb toward Clarice, "asking about coordination with the marshals." McCaffrey raised an eyebrow at her. "You work for the courthouse, ma'am?" "I'm associated," Clarice replied evenly. "You're detaining a man beside a federally registered vehicle. I asked a reasonable question." McCaffrey stepped closer and his smile tightened. "And I'm giving you a reasonable answer. Step back before this becomes obstruction." Clarice held her ground. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're standing in a federal parking structure," she said, "and stopping someone without visible cause. That man may be under protective jurisdiction. I'm asking you again. Are you coordinating with U.S. Marshals?" McCaffrey didn't answer. He turned instead to the man in the hoodie. "Name?" The man shook his head slightly. "I work for the court, IT division. I was just getting something from my car. My ID is inside." Clarice's gaze flicked toward the man. She could see it now, the badge on his belt, the quiet panic in his eyes. McCaffrey exhaled sharply. "You people always think you're special." Clarice blinked once. "You people?" There was a pause. Thick, electric, charged. McCaffrey smiled without warmth. "You want to join him in the back of a cruiser, ma'am? Keep pushing." Clarice slowly reached into her blazer. McCaffrey's hand dropped to his holster. The moment Clarice's fingers brushed the edge of her wallet, McCaffrey's voice shot through the garage. "Hands where I can see 'em!" Clarice froze, not from fear, but calculation. She lifted her empty left hand slowly, palm out. "Captain," she said calmly, "I'm reaching for identification. Nothing more. I said hands now." Behind him, one of the younger officers, Jason Teller, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted between McCaffrey's rigid stance and Clarice's composed posture. Clarice moved again, slower this time. Her right hand pulled out the slim black wallet and opened it like a quiet gavel. Inside was a gold badge, federal seal glinting under the fluorescent garage lights. Below it, her credentials: Honorable Clarice M. Whitmore, United States District Judge, Eastern District of Pennsylvania. The silence was louder than McCaffrey's voice had been. Clarice held the wallet steady. "Now," she said, her voice cool and level, "would you like to explain why you're detaining a federal employee on federal property without cause or coordination?" Jason Teller took a step back. McCaffrey stared. His jaw clenched. His mind raced to recover. Something. Anything. "She didn't identify herself," he snapped. Clarice didn't blink. "Because you didn't ask. You assumed." Leon Brooks, the third officer, glanced at the ID and exhaled softly. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. "Captain," Teller said carefully, "maybe we should call this in. Let the federal liaison—" "Shut it, Teller!" McCaffrey barked, but the damage was done. Clarice turned towards the young man still leaning on the hood. "Sir, if you're unharmed, I suggest you step away from the vehicle slowly. Retrieve your ID and report to your supervisor." He nodded and backed off, eyes wide. Clarice then turned back to McCaffrey. "I suggest you do the same, unless you want to explain your actions to the Office of the Inspector General." McCaffrey's face burned red. And just then, in the far corner of the garage, a soft click echoed. The surveillance camera had pivoted directly toward them. McCaffrey turned his head slowly toward the camera. He hadn't noticed it earlier, too busy asserting control, barking orders, assuming dominance. But now it stared straight down at him, lens unblinking, light blinking red. Recording. Clarice followed his gaze. "Federal surveillance feeds are archived and monitored, Captain," she said. "This garage is under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Marshal Service." She let that sit. "I imagine your body cam is also active?" McCaffrey didn't answer. Teller and Brooks exchanged glances. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on them. Clarice took a step back, not in retreat, but in withdrawal. She'd made her point. "I suggest you release any footage you've recorded tonight to your department's legal counsel. I'll be filing a formal report in the morning." McCaffrey finally spoke, but it came out more bark than words. "This isn't over." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "For your sake, Captain, I hope you're right, because if it is, that means it's already gone too far." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the elevator. The garage was quiet now. The tension didn't break. It just shifted, lingering in the oil-stained air like smoke after a shot. Jason Teller watched her go. He'd never seen anyone speak to McCaffrey like that, certainly not someone who looked like her. And certainly not without backup. But there was something in her presence, like she knew the law better than anyone. Because maybe she did. As the elevator doors slid closed behind Clarice, she exhaled for the first time. It wasn't over. Not even close. The elevator hummed softly as it rose toward the upper levels of the courthouse. Inside, Clarice Whitmore leaned against the wall, eyes closed for a beat longer than usual. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving only a low throb behind her temples and a familiar tightness in her chest, the aftertaste of confrontation. She'd done everything by the book. No raised voice, no sudden movement, just facts, law, and presence. And still, she had to measure every breath. As the door slid open, she stepped into the quiet corridor leading to the secure judicial wing. A federal security guard at the desk looked up and nodded. "Evening, Judge Whitmore." "Evening, Marcus." He paused. "Everything all right down there?" Clarice hesitated. "Not yet, but it will be." She headed into her chambers, kicked off her heels, and sat down at the wide oak desk that had seen more legal battles than some entire courtrooms. She opened her laptop, connected her secure line, and began typing. Subject: Incident Report, Unauthorized Detention Attempt. To Office of the U.S. Marshal's Liaison, DOJ Eastern District. From Honorable Clarice M. Whitmore. Each word she typed sharpened the moment, cutting away uncertainty, turning memory into evidence. Dates, times, officer names, body cam angle, camera ID in the garage, KM 14B. She included everything. Before hitting send, she paused, reread it once, and added one final line. This is not an isolated incident. I believe further investigation is warranted. Click sent. Clarice leaned back, exhaled, and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Somewhere down the street, Captain Darren McCaffrey was likely rewriting the story in his own words. But facts had a funny way of surviving, even under pressure, especially when cameras were watching. Captain Darren McCaffrey sat in his unmarked cruiser just a few blocks away, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The engine was running, but he hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes. The words, Judge Clarice Whitmore, echoed in his head like a bad song on repeat. A judge. He had manhandled a federal judge. On federal property. McCaffrey cursed under his breath and yanked his radio off the dash. Dispatch, patch me through to Chief Reed. There was static, then a beat. Go ahead, Captain. Need to meet. Now. Inside Philadelphia Police Headquarters, Chief Malcolm Reed hung up the phone, pinched the bridge of his nose, and muttered, Damn it, Darren. He already knew. The call from the courthouse security desk came 15 minutes ago. Then another from the U.S. Marshal's office. One more from Internal Affairs. This wasn't going to be one of those let it die quietly nights. Not this time. Clarice, meanwhile, had changed into jeans and a navy hoodie. She sat on the small couch in her living room, nursing a mug of peppermint tea and scrolling through headlines on her phone. Nothing yet, no leaks, no chatter, just routine politics and sports scores. But something told her that wouldn't last. Her phone buzzed. Natalie Harper, Federal Protection Service. She answered on the second ring. Judge Whitmore, Natalie's voice was crisp, we received your report. I'm assigning agents to pull all garage footage and body cam files immediately. Expect a follow-up by morning. Clarice nodded, though Harper couldn't see. Thank you. Please include any audio from Officer Jason Teller if available. We're on it. And, for what it's worth, nice work staying calm down there. Clarice's voice softened. Sometimes calm is all they allow us. Harper didn't reply right away. Then, we'll be in touch. The line went dead. Clarice placed the phone down gently and looked out the window. The courthouse lights still glowed in the distance. She could almost see the garage from here. Tomorrow would come fast, and she had no intention of flinching. At 6:32 the next morning, Officer Jason Teller sat alone in the locker room at the 8th District Precinct. His uniform hung untouched beside him. The events of the previous night played on loop in his mind. The posture of the judge, the moment her ID opened, the way McCaffrey's voice snapped like a frayed wire. He wasn't a rookie. Not really. 2 years on the force. But this was his first month under McCaffrey's command. And now he wasn't sure what he wanted more, to forget it ever happened or to finally do something about it. Yo, Teller, a voice called from the doorway. Cap wants to see you. Teller stood slowly, tied his boots with a shaky hand, and walked the long hallway toward McCaffrey's office. The blinds were down, the door closed. He knocked once. Come in? McCaffrey sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, coffee going cold beside a pile of paper he clearly wasn't reading. You told the feds anything yet? McCaffrey asked without looking up. Teller hesitated. They haven't called me. McCaffrey finally looked at him, eyes hard, measuring. You and I both know how that woman played it, he said. She came in hot, flashing titles, making us look bad. Teller stayed quiet. McCaffrey leaned forward. We're brothers in blue, right? We don't stab each other over politics. She made you nervous. She used her badge like a weapon. That's what they do. Jason met his eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move fast. She didn't do anything wrong. McCaffrey's jaw twitched. Careful, son. Teller stepped back. "I need to go suit up." He left without waiting for permission. McCaffrey watched him go, the tight coil of anger growing behind his ribs. He couldn't afford cracks in the wall, and Teller was becoming a crack. By 9:15 a.m., Clarice was seated in her chambers, surrounded by a small army of screens. A flat monitor on the left streamed internal courthouse surveillance. On the right, her secure DOJ terminal displayed incoming evidence requests. In front of her, her inbox filled faster than she could respond. Subject: Incident video request. Urgent. From Office of Inspector General, DOJ. Status: evidence received. Review underway. She tapped her pen against her notebook, eyes flicking across timestamps. Every minute of that garage encounter now existed in 3 angles: garage cam, cruiser dash, and McCaffrey's own body cam. She had requested all of them. As she cued the body cam file, Clarice leaned back and pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear. It began with McCaffrey stepping onto the garage floor, shouting orders. Her own voice entered seconds later, measured, formal, unmistakable. Then came the tension, the shove, the threat. But what chilled her most wasn't what McCaffrey did. It was what he said after grabbing her arm. "You people think these badges make you untouchable. Let's see if that holds when you're face down on the pavement." Clarice paused the video. A slow breath escaped her lips. Not anger, not shock, just exhaustion, deep and old. A knock came at her door. It was Natalie Harper. The agent stepped inside without ceremony, a tablet in hand. "We've got all camera feeds, confirmed timestamps, IDs, even audio backup from the officer's mic. DOJ's watching it now, and—" She hesitated. "And what?" Clarice asked. "It's worse than you thought. This isn't his first time." Clarice stood. "How far back?" 10 years, Natalie replied, but most of it was buried. IA complaints, sealed settlements, officers transferred quietly. Clarice's voice dropped to a whisper. "How many?" Natalie looked her in the eye. "Enough to call it systemic." Across town, Captain Darren McCaffrey sat in Chief Malcolm Reed's office, arms folded tightly over his chest. The blinds were drawn. The room smelled of burnt coffee and tension. Chief Reed didn't mince words. "You laid hands on a federal judge, Darren." "She never said she was a judge," McCaffrey shot back. "She came in acting like some authority figure." "She is an authority figure," Reed snapped, rising from his chair. "She's a federal judge with clearance higher than yours, mine, and half the city combined." McCaffrey opened his mouth, but Reed wasn't done. "I got calls from the U.S. Attorney, the Marshals, DOJ, and now Internal Affairs is in my lobby. You think this is just about a misunderstanding? This is about pattern. Your name came up in 6 buried files." McCaffrey stood, eyes narrowing. "I've kept this city in line for 20 years. I know who the real criminals are." Reed stepped forward. "You're not untouchable, Darren. Not anymore." There was a long pause. Then McCaffrey said, "I want legal counsel." Reed nodded once. "You'll need it." Back at the courthouse, Clarice finished drafting a formal judicial memorandum. Clean, factual, and without emotion. She listed every statute violated, from unlawful detainment on federal grounds to interference with federal duties. She included witness names, camera IDs, and official timestamps. She CC'd the U.S. Attorney's Office and DOJ Eastern Division. When she hit send, she didn't smile. She just stood, stretched her shoulders, and reached for her coat. In the hallway outside her chambers, Jason Teller waited, hat in hand, shoulders tense. "Judge Whitmore?" Clarice paused. He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say, I saw everything last night. I didn't do enough, and I should have." She studied him. Young, nervous, honest. "Then do something now," she said gently. "Tell the truth." Jason nodded, and as Clarice walked away, he pulled out his phone and dialed Internal Affairs. That evening, Clarice sat once more in her living room, this time not with tea, but with a hard copy of her own report in hand. The sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting long amber streaks across the floor. Her phone buzzed. Rachel McClure, FBI. Clarice answered. Judge Whitmore, this is Special Agent McClure, Eastern District Bureau Liaison. We've reviewed the body cam footage and the garage recordings. Based on preliminary findings, we're opening a formal investigation into Captain Darren McCaffrey and the 8th District. Clarice didn't respond right away, then quietly, Understood. What's the scope? McClure didn't flinch. We're not just looking at last night, we're reviewing a decade of complaints, some linked to racial profiling, others involving suppressed IA reports. Clarice nodded slowly. Let me know what you need. McClure continued. You may also be called upon to testify, not just in civil court, but possibly in a federal inquiry, maybe even a Senate subcommittee. Clarice's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her file. Then I'll be ready. A pause. One more thing, McClure added. We flagged some unusual financial activity tied to McCaffrey. Property acquisitions, offshore wire transfers. DOJ's Financial Crimes Division is on it. Clarice raised an eyebrow. So this isn't just about power. No, McClure said. It's about money, influence, and the people who think they're above the law. When the call ended, Clarice set the phone down and looked out over the city once more. For the first time in a long while, she didn't just feel like a judge. She felt like a witness. The next morning began with rain. Not a storm, just a steady, quiet drizzle that softened the edges of the Philadelphia skyline. It was the kind of rain that made people slow down, think longer, speak less. Inside the DOJ's Eastern District Command Center, monitors glowed in rows, casting a bluish light across tired faces and half-empty coffee cups. On screen after screen, a name kept appearing in bold white text. Darren J. McCaffrey. Subject, Priority 1. Special Agent Rachel McClure stood in front of the main display wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She'd been in federal law enforcement for 15 years, and this wasn't her first time seeing corruption dressed in a uniform. But something about McCaffrey felt different, slippery, connected, protected. We've confirmed 16 IA complaints over 12 years, she said, turning to the agents behind her. Only 3 reached final review. The rest? Buried, redirected, or settled quietly. She clicked a remote, shifting the display to financial data. And here's why. A series of bank statements filled the screen. Property purchases, LLC transfers, campaign contributions tied to dummy organizations. Looks like someone's been collecting more than his pension, one agent muttered. McClure didn't smile. We have enough to open a criminal conspiracy case, but we'll need our primary witness. Everyone in the room knew who that was. Across town, Clarice Whitmore sat in her office, reviewing case law on obstruction of justice. Not for McCaffrey, she knew the statutes by heart, but for herself. She needed to be prepared for every legal angle, every attempt to twist her actions into overreach. There was a soft knock. Natalie Harper stepped inside, damp from the rain, tablet in hand. It's official. Federal investigation is open. You're the key witness. Clarice set her pen down. Then let's make sure they hear every word. Harper nodded. We've pulled footage from every camera in that garage, not just the ones near you. Turns out McCaffrey's team disabled one, on purpose. We've got logs. Clarice didn't flinch. That's tampering. Yup, and we just got confirmation. 2 more officers are willing to testify under protection. Jason Teller is one of them. Clarice looked up. That took courage. He said you inspired it, Harper replied. Meanwhile, Captain McCaffrey sat in a sterile, windowless conference room inside police headquarters. No badge on his chest now, just a wrinkled white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a lawyer by his side. Opposite him sat U.S. Attorney Marcus Ellison. Ellison was calm, almost soft-spoken, but his questions cut deep. Captain McCaffrey, How do you explain the missing body cam footage from your arrest of a federal judge? McCaffrey scowled. There was no arrest. Ellison didn't blink. Then why was Judge Whitmore placed against your vehicle? Why did her briefcase fall open, revealing classified files now confirmed as protected federal materials? McCaffrey shifted. I didn't know who she was. And once you did? Silence. Ellison leaned forward. We have footage. Audio, witnesses, bank records, IA files. You are not here for an interview, Captain. This is a proffer session. You either help yourself or you get steamrolled. McCaffrey looked at his lawyer, but the man had nothing to offer. I want a deal, McCaffrey muttered. Ellison nodded. Then start talking. That evening, Clarice sat alone in the courthouse security room, watching a replay of the garage footage, this time from a new angle. She saw herself standing, calm and firm. She saw McCaffrey advance. She watched him lay hands on her again and again, this time without emotion, without flinching. But what struck her most wasn't the violence. It was the silence from everyone else. Nobody stopped him. Not at first. That was what had to change. She turned off the monitor. The next morning, headlines broke across every platform. Federal judge assaulted by Philly police captain. DOJ investigation launched. Captain McCaffrey, under federal scrutiny, internal affairs knew for years. Whistleblower cop speaks out. We were told to stay quiet. Clarice's phone rang nonstop. Reporters, advocates, colleagues, even a few judges from other states offering private support. But it was the call from the mayor's office that truly signaled a shift. Mayor Elaine Booker wanted to meet. Inside City Hall, the atmosphere was tight. Political aides rushed in and out of glass offices like nervous bees. Mayor Booker stood when Clarice entered, offering her hand with a solemn nod. Judge Whitmore, thank you for coming. Clarice shook it. Madam Mayor. They sat. I'll be direct, Booker began. This city is on fire. Half the council wants a public hearing. The other half wants to distance themselves, and the governor just called to ask what I'm doing about it. Clarice said nothing. You're becoming the face of this, whether you want to or not. Clarice leaned in slightly. Then let's make sure that face stands for something better. Mayor Booker raised an eyebrow. I'm not interested in punishment for headlines, Clarice said. I want accountability. I want policy changes, independent oversight, whistleblower protection, and full transparency. Booker exhaled slowly. That's a long list. Clarice didn't blink. Then we better start early. Back at the precinct, McCaffrey's desk sat empty. Jason Teller walked past it with measured steps, a folded document in his hand. He entered Chief Reed's office and placed the paper on his desk. A full statement, he said. Reed looked up. You sure about this? Teller nodded. I saw what happened. I saw who she was, and I said nothing. This is how I fix that. Reed picked up the paper. It's a start. That night, Clarice walked along Market Street, hood up, hands in her pockets. It was still raining, light, steady, cleansing. The courthouse lights glowed behind her. The city was loud, but her mind was quiet. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because justice had been done, but because it had begun. It was the kind of quiet morning that made the weight of everything feel heavier. Clarice Whitmore sat at her desk, the windows behind her misted with early fall condensation. Her inbox was full, her voicemail overflowing, and yet none of it mattered more than the single manila folder sitting in front of her. It was stamped, Confidential, Internal Affairs Reports, 2008-2023. She had requested it through official DOJ channels. She hadn't expected it to arrive so soon. Inside were 31 complaints against Darren McCaffrey. 31. Some were brief, excessive force, verbal threats, intimidation. Others were longer, with witness statements, photographs, internal reviews. But what chilled Clarice more than the content was the pattern. Every time a complaint had risen high enough to trigger action, it was either resolved informally or transferred to another command. 2 involved quiet settlements with the city. 1 came from a fellow officer who later resigned without explanation. She closed the file and looked at Natalie Harper, who sat across from her. "Why wasn't this investigated earlier?" Clarice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Natalie leaned forward. "Because he had people covering for him. Chiefs, union reps, even a few city attorneys. Every time something got close to public exposure, someone swept it back under." "And now?" "Now," Natalie said. "They're all under review." Clarice nodded slowly. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, city employees were just beginning to gather. Trucks, folding chairs, microphones. She recognized the seal of the mayor's office on the banners. "You ready for the press conference?" Natalie asked. "No," Clarice replied, "but I'm going anyway." Mayor Elaine Booker stepped up to the podium, flanked by city council members, a representative from DOJ, and Clarice. The crowd was larger than expected: press, activists, court employees, curious citizens. "I want to begin by saying this," the mayor said. "We failed." Cameras clicked. "We failed to protect one of our own. We failed to act on evidence, and we failed to live up to the standards this city deserves." Clarice stood silently beside her, hands clasped in front, listening. "Effective immediately," Booker continued. "Captain Darren McCaffrey is suspended without pay pending federal indictment. A formal agreement has been signed with the Department of Justice to initiate full federal oversight of the 8th Police District, with a task force assigned to investigate systemic failures." There was a murmur through the crowd. "Finally," Booker said, turning toward Clarice, "Judge Clarice Whitmore has agreed to serve as an advisor to the reform initiative. Her insights, her experience, and frankly, her courage will help guide us forward." Clarice stepped to the mic. She paused, then spoke clearly, slowly. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about every person who's ever been silenced, ignored, or harmed by the systems meant to protect them. It's about restoring trust, one policy, one officer, one moment at a time. We don't need perfect people. We need accountable ones." The applause was genuine, not explosive. It was the kind that came from people who had waited too long to hear something honest. That night, in a secure conference room at the DOJ field office, Clarice sat across from U.S. Attorney Marcus Ellison and FBI Agent McClure. The mood was different now, less reaction, more strategy. "We've got what we need to indict," Ellison said. "The financial records, the footage, the whistleblower statements. It's airtight." Clarice nodded. "But we've uncovered something else," McClure added, tapping her tablet. "McCaffrey wasn't just abusing power. He was protecting other officers. There's a small network, 4, maybe 5 individuals, who helped bury complaints, reroute disciplinary actions, and in some cases, threaten victims." Clarice's face hardened. "So it goes deeper." McClure nodded. "We're calling it a pattern of administrative conspiracy." Ellison slid a folder toward her. Inside were the names of 3 officers and 2 city employees. Some Clarice recognized. One had even testified in her courtroom. "These people aren't just guilty of cover-up," Ellison said. "They enabled abuse. We're going after all of them." Clarice closed the folder. "Good." Then quieter. "Let's make sure the city sees every step. No more shadows." Back at the 8th District, Jason Teller sat at his desk reviewing old reports. He had agreed to cooperate fully, on the record, under oath. And it showed. Already 2 officers had come forward, citing Teller's courage. The atmosphere in the precinct had changed. Quiet, uncertain, but no longer complicit. Late in the day, his phone buzzed. Internal affairs. They were ready for his testimony. Jason stood, tucked the file under his arm, and walked down the hallway. Past McCaffrey's old office, now empty and dark. He didn't look back. That weekend, Clarice visited her mother's grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, trees shedding yellow leaves onto the gravel path. She knelt, brushed a few stray petals from the headstone and whispered, "You always told me to speak up, even when it was hard." She paused. "I did. And this time, they listened." The wind rustled through the trees like approval. The following Monday, the indictment of Darren McCaffrey was unsealed in federal court. Charges included obstruction of justice, civil rights violations under color of law, conspiracy, and destruction of public records. He was led into custody in silence. But outside the courthouse, the city was anything but quiet. People gathered. Some held signs. Most just watched. Not to see him fall, but to see if this time something would truly change. Clarice watched from the balcony above, her hands resting gently on the marble rail. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The courtroom was colder than Clarice remembered, not in temperature, but in energy. The air held something sharp, something final, the kind of silence that only comes when truth is about to become permanent. Darren McCaffrey sat at the defense table, hands folded, jaw set, no longer in uniform, no badge, no belt, just a gray suit that didn't quite fit, like it had been borrowed for the occasion. Across the aisle sat representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, and two victims who had never spoken publicly before. Clarice sat near the back, not as a judge, not as a lawyer, just a witness, a citizen. The trial was swift. Not because it was rushed, but because the evidence was overwhelming. Video, audio, testimony, bank records, threats. Jason Teller took the stand and spoke with clarity. "We were told not to question Captain McCaffrey. We were told that protecting the department's image came before protecting people." When asked why he came forward, he looked across the room, right at Clarice, and said, "Because I finally saw someone who didn't flinch, and I realized I'd been flinching my whole career." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Clarice exhaled slowly. The room didn't need more words after that. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Outside the courthouse, the press surged forward like a wave. Microphones, cameras, questions shouted from every direction. Clarice stepped to the podium, this time without hesitation. "We cannot undo what happened," she said, "but we can decide how we respond to it. Today, a man who abused his power was held accountable, not because of politics, but because of facts." Cheney paused. "This isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning. Justice is not a moment. It's a practice." Then she stepped down, walked past the cameras, and kept going. Back at City Hall, Mayor Elaine Booker convened an emergency session. "We're not waiting for Washington," she said. "Philadelphia will lead. Within 2 weeks, new legislation passed unanimously, mandatory body cam policies, independent civilian oversight boards, a whistleblower protection office, and a reform of the Internal Affairs Division." Clarice helped write it all. She did it quietly, behind closed doors, with language rooted in the Constitution, not in vengeance. And the city noticed. For the first time in years, community forums filled up. Officers attended voluntarily. Questions were asked without fear. Change didn't come like a tidal wave. It came like a steady current. One afternoon, Clarice received a letter. Embossed seal. Heavy paper. United States Senate, Judiciary Committee. They were requesting her testimony at an upcoming hearing on national police reform. Clarice stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and closed it gently. She would answer, of course, but not because she wanted attention, because there were still people out there, quiet, unseen, who needed to know they weren't alone. Later that week, Clarice returned to the courthouse for one last hearing, the sentencing of Darren McCaffrey. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Judge Andrea Holloway delivered the verdict. "Mr. McCaffrey, your actions did not occur in isolation. They were part of a pattern supported by silence, protected by influence. But justice, like water, finds its way. 12 years, federal custody, asset forfeiture. He didn't flinch when they cuffed him, but he didn't look at Clarice either. That evening, Clarice sat on a bench outside her childhood church, the city lights flickering beyond the stained glass. She watched people pass, young, old, tired, hopeful. A small group of kids ran past, laughing. One of them stopped, looked at her, then whispered to his friend, "That's her." Clarice smiled, not for the recognition, but for what it might mean to them. Washington, D.C., Senate Judiciary Committee, Public Hearing Room B. The room was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of silence built from attention, where every breath, every blink was observed, recorded, judged. Clarice Whitmore sat at the witness table, a small nameplate in front of her, Honor Clarice M. Whitmore, United States District Judge, Eastern District of Pennsylvania. To her left sat a civil rights attorney from Georgia. To her right, the chief of police from Minneapolis. Behind them, rows of staffers, media, and citizens filled the marble chamber. Senator Evelyn Ross leaned forward from the dais. "Judge Whitmore, thank you for your courage and your service." Clarice nodded once. "Thank you, Senator." "I want to begin where the nation began hearing your name, Philadelphia. In your own words, what happened there?" Clarice's voice was steady. "A routine moment turned violent because of assumption. I was viewed not as a judge or even as a citizen, but as a threat. The system allowed that to happen, not once, but over many years. I was just the one who finally had enough access to be believed." Gasps were subtle, but present. Senator Ross leaned back. "Would you say your experience is common?" Clarice didn't hesitate. "Tragically, yes. Most people don't have a badge or a title to protect them. When they speak up, they're dismissed, or worse, punished." The room shifted. "What reforms would you suggest on a national level?" another senator asked. Clarice inhaled, then spoke clearly. "3 things: independent federal oversight of internal police investigations, legal protection for whistleblowers, and mandatory anti-bias training tied to federal funding," another voice asked. "And what would you say to critics who call this overreach?" Clarice paused, then answered slowly. "I would say this. Accountability is not overreach. It is a mirror. And if we're afraid of what it shows, that's not the mirror's fault." By noon, every news outlet had her testimony running across headlines. "Accountability is not overreach." Judge Whitmore testifies in historic hearing, From Victim to Vanguard, How One Woman Sparked a Movement. Senators signal support for federal police reform after emotional testimony. Back in Philadelphia, Jason Teller watched the broadcast on a mounted TV in the precinct break room. He wasn't the only one. A dozen officers stood shoulder to shoulder, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the screen. No one spoke. Until one rookie said, "She's got more guts than half of us combined." Jason replied, "She's got more truth, too." In the weeks that followed, momentum grew. Senator Ross drafted the Justice Integrity Act, a sweeping federal bill aimed at nationwide law enforcement accountability. Clarice reviewed language, suggested edits, and testified again before the House committee. When the bill passed the Senate with bipartisan support, it was the first of its kind in over 3 decades. Clarice didn't celebrate. She returned to her courtroom, back to the bench, back to the work. But things had changed. Officers addressed her differently now, respectfully, carefully. Young women wrote her letters, saying they wanted to study law because of her. Even court clerks, once dismissive of her authority, now listened closer when she spoke. One afternoon, Clarice received a small box in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded note. "You reminded me who the badge is really for. Thank you." It was signed, Officer Walavan 83, J. T. She smiled, folded the note again, and placed it in her desk drawer beside her Senate invitation. Months passed. The media moved on, as they always do. But in city after city, reform hearings were held, policies rewritten, old cases reopened. Some officers were removed, others were promoted. Most adjusted, some willingly, some not. But the shift was real, tangible, permanent. On the anniversary of her first encounter in the courthouse garage, Clarice returned to the same underground level. She stood beside the camera that caught it all. The lighting hadn't changed, but she had. Her phone buzzed. Natalie Harper. "Thought you'd want to know," Natalie said. "They just renamed the Oversight Division." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "To what?" Natalie paused, then smiled. "The Whitmore Commission." Clarice didn't cry, but she closed her eyes and let the weight of the moment settle in. Not pride, not fame, just peace. And maybe finally the feeling that all of it, the silence, the confrontation, the hearings, the headlines, had built something real. Not for her, but for those who would come after. There's a kind of silence that settles after a long storm, not empty, but full of meaning. When Judge Clarice Whitmore stood beneath the soft light of that Senate chamber, it wasn't just her voice they heard. It was every voice that had been dismissed, ignored, or buried beneath uniforms and systems that never saw them as worthy of protection. Her journey, from a quiet stand in a parking garage to national reform, wasn't about outrage. It was about dignity, about facing injustice with composure, not cruelty. And perhaps most of all, it was about showing that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes just refuses to step aside. The lesson is a quiet one, but lasting. Stand tall in your truth, even when the world asks you to shrink. For those in the Black community who've been told to wait, to soften, to prove, Clarice reminded them, and all of us, that justice is not granted by favor. It's earned through persistence, honor, and the power of standing firm when others expect you to fold. Her story is not singular. It's a reflection of many others in the Black community whose names we may never hear, but whose strength shapes neighborhoods, courtrooms, and classrooms across the country. Like a porch light left on in the dark, their presence reminds us someone is still awake, still watching, still protecting. And perhaps that's the truth behind the lesson. Don't rush to judge what you don't understand. The person you overlook today may hold the key to justice tomorrow. Just like a quiet melody drifting from a forgotten piano, sometimes the softest truths carry the deepest echoes. So take a moment. Think about the faces you pass each day. The security guard, the woman at the bus stop, the IT guy whose badge you don't notice. In the Black community and far beyond, stories like Clarice's happen in small, unseen ways every day. And each one holds the power to bend the arc a little closer to justice. If this story moved you, consider sharing it, not for numbers or praise, but to carry a small light forward. You never know who's walking in darkness, waiting for a reason to believe that quiet strength still matters. Because sometimes it's the voice we almost missed that ends up changing everything.